Hey, good evening, everybody. It's Joe Driscoll back again with the Salt City Grind. Thank you for joining me. I hope you guys are doing well. I'm here today with Chief Kenton Buckner. Chief, thanks for joining me.
Councilman Driscoll, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So I'll start this out with, I was listening to the reason I started a podcast was this guy, Sam Harris, who I really love. He's got a great podcast. And he was saying today that, a good conversation is the only chance we have to get back from the edge of where we are. We see all this unrest and all this, violence going on, and talking it out, even when we don't agree, especially when we don't agree. If we're only having communication with folks that we agree with, that's how we got to where we are. The situation where everything, it feels. I'm very concerned. I don't know how you feel. On that same podcast with Sam Harris, he was talking about to General Stan McChrystal about the social cohesion and the social glue of our very fabric of our society, feeling like it's tearing at the seams at times. And so I feel like communicating and talking is the only solution we have, the only chance we have to make things better. So I just want to say from the jump street, whatever else you and I agree on, don't agree on, you've been very ready to communicate and talk and let people know where you stand, and do your thing. So I appreciate that first and foremost. I just want to say that I appreciate you being, because I think both of us need to have our heads examined for being willing to go live when it's not required to have these conversations. But But I think, when I said it to you, you said, the steam, there's a lot of steam out there and we got to talk it out to get out there. So just want to start by saying thanks for being willing to communicate. And, if you wanted to say anything about communication and your attitude towards policing.
Well, I would first say that, again, thank you for having me on to, have opportunity to have access to the folks that follow you. In addition to your quote about a dialogue or a conversation is needed, I think in order for true progress to occur, that conversation at times must become uncomfortable. For me, for the people asking the questions, for people on all sides of the issue, if we're not willing to have those uncomfortable moments where we really do critical self-assessment, because I've always operated from the premise that the first letter in the word improvement is I. And I certainly recognize that police and my profession and my police agency has an opportunity for improvement. The issues that occurred in Minneapolis have only highlighted a continuation of things that people have been complaining about for decades. We just saw another vivid illustration of it in broad daylight that pulled the scab off for some communities. Perhaps it's new to other communities, but it certainly is a reminder that we have to do something if we don't want to see those kinds of things happen again, because they've happened far too often. The common denominator, when we've seen it, has been African-American men. Let's just be honest about that. And even though the issues that we're discussing are broad in many instances, there are some common denominators between police and communities of color, is where a lot of these things hit ground zero, where rubber meets the road. So I think as a chief, it's my job during these moments is to genuinely listen to the concerns of the community, and then also have a genuine heart about the reform of some of the things that people are asking for. To your credit, I won't agree on everything that everyone is asking for, but I certainly can't come in the room with a closed mind or closed heart to act as if that my police department or my city or my profession doesn't need to be overhauled in many regards.
Right. And so I'll, get into those conversations. I'll say, first of all, again, and a compliment to the force and to your leadership and to the mayors. The second night, the night after the riots, I think people don't ingest as much news as we do, as in your position, in my position. But Buffalo, we saw an SUV drive into a crowd of officers, seriously injuring 3 of them. We saw the man Martin, the elderly gentleman who got knocked down in Buffalo, split his head open. Rochester, there was cars lit on fire middle of the day. Shop owners were beaten. Syracuse had its problems, but the fact that you and Mayor worked together to calm the tensions by listening and sending out ambassadors to engage with the protesters, to encourage the event to separate peacefully, I thought was a big credit to you and your department and to the mayor. But so then I'll take that from there to go to the more awkward part of the conversation. You and I had spoken earlier about Dennis Nett, the officer, the incident there that was very publicized. And I still think I still hold with the council's opinion that, it didn't need to be that way. And I'll say with Buffalo as well, I think, when you look at Buffalo, so they suspended the officer, and then instantly we had, 57 officers leave the department in one.
They left the unit.
They left the unit. Sorry, not the department. Right. Sorry, and that's an important clarification. They didn't quit the job altogether. They said they didn't want to be a part of the riot unit anymore, or whatever the official terminology is for that unit. But doesn't this feel like it feels very tone deaf to me, some of this at this moment, when it's saying anytime we say to you guys, we need a little more accountability, we need a little more transparency. And then it's like, well, deal with the riot yourselves then. It seemed kind of the response we got. And similar in Syracuse, I do realize that it's nuanced. We had in Syracuse, we had people with metal bats breaking the glass windows. But, Mayor said to me, if that was following protocol and we're not happy with that, should we look at protocol? Should we look at, if the guy had, the thing that I keep thinking of is the guy had his photo badge on. And I remember in all the 80s movies, it was like, a psycho would jump out from behind a bush, the cardboard cutouts, and the cop had to make that decision in a split second whether to shoot or not. And then a pregnant lady, they had the cardboard cutouts in the training exercises to show you, they had to know in a moment who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. And so, what's your thoughts about this incident? And, don't you think that having a little more accountability or transparency is what we're asking for? And it feels to me kind of like tone deaf to not respond to that in Buffalo and in Syracuse.
Well, I think that your sentiments are shared by a lot of people. But I have a question that I'll ask you, representing the people tonight. Would you agree that Mr. Nett stood in between us and the people who had just attacked the building?
Yes.
Knowing that he stood between us and the people who had just attacked the building, and we had deployed lethal and less lethal weapons, don't you think it makes sense to move him out of the way as we potentially get ready to engage that crowd?
Yeah, I do think but
and do you agree that the people who ran out, the first 6 officers plus the officer who actually touched him, all 7 of them said, move out of the way, get back, move out of the way, get back, get back, get back, get back. And he himself in his statement said he heard them. He was just about to, but he didn't before he was pushed. So if we agree he was in between us and the threat, and we have less lethal and lethal weapons, if we just take the police out of the equation, just put it in common sense standpoint, should someone be standing between you and weapons and the people potentially that you're getting ready to have to use them with? Should anyone be between those two things from a safety standpoint?
No.
So that's kind of where I pivoted. Now, your point could be, well, could you have given him a couple more seconds, or how about 5 or 6 more yells, or did you have to knock him down? Well, yes. I've already apologized and said it was not our intent to knock him down. That was my first apology. So the fact that I took ownership for that says that we never intended to knock him down. We never intended to damage his camera, but we did intend to clear the way so that we can engage the people who were actively attacking the building. And that was pretty much the premise of my decision. But I do understand watching that and what media means to our democracy, how it looked like an attack on democracy, not just Mr. Nett, but the fact that some will see it as we moved a third-party independent lens of what we were doing that day.
Yeah. Well, I can, I do think it, as I said, I think it's a nuanced conversation. I think you make your point. So I'll say we'll go to some of the questions we got from folks.
Okay.
Again, I think you and I discussed this before it began about the recent officer-involved shooting that occurred and how you've had 2 press conferences about that, and you don't have you're unable to really comment any further than what you've said in the 2 press statements. So I just wanted to touch that up front to say we're not dodging it, but what's been said has been said.
Okay.
I'm sure this is a hot topic. I would love to hear what Chief thinks about the police restructuring movement. This individual doesn't like the word defund because it's inaccurate and inflammatory, but what are his thoughts about training for de-escalation? Is Chief considering the potential of adding more social workers?
Well, first of all, let me just do it as they said. I agree with whoever sent that comment in defunding the police department. It's probably not a wise thing to do. When you look at our city in our attempts to, number one, come out of a third of our city being in poverty, increasing quality of life in our community, being a destination location for people to live, work, and play, that public safety is a big piece of being able to provide all of those things. So I think defunding the police is not a really, I don't think it's even a legitimate request. Do I think that police need additional training in some things? I do. We already train in de-escalation. De-escalation is already a part of our policies. We also have officers, about 40 or so, that are certified to deal with individuals who are experiencing a mental episode or mental crisis. They're called CIT, Certified Crisis Intervention Training, which was created by a department in Memphis with NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. And our goal is to have 20% of our organization to be certified in that. Respectfully, I would push back against having social workers assigned to me. Don't assign me social workers. I signed up to be the police chief. Take social workers and stop having police respond to an incident that doesn't involve a crime. There's no reason for me to go to someone who's talking to themselves in Walgreens. They haven't committed a crime. They haven't presented a weapon. Have someone from a mental health standpoint go and talk to that individual about what's going on with them. When was the last time they took their medication? Who is the person that they're under the care of? And then what kind of temporary, short-term, mid-term services can we get them attached to get them back on track, which in many instances solve the issue with the mental illness. Now, that's a heavy price tag to that, because in some instances, you're going to be talking about some of the extreme cases of temporarily having to maybe institutionalize some of these individuals. And we know that is what has turned many of them out on the street in the first place. There's not enough beds to go around for the number of people who are in that crisis, which is how they wound up at the front door of the police department. So from the reform standpoint, and we've heard too, I think you got some questions about the school system. Please understand this, public. The police never asked for these responsibilities. We didn't ask to be sent to individuals with mental crisis. We didn't ask to be in your school systems. You came to us because they were overloaded and something was going on in there that you felt police need to be a part of this situation. I've always said 95% of the things that we're called to deal with in the school system, a school administrator should be doing that, faculty, or some sort of first level security that is hired and paid by the school system to address that when it exceeds their capacity from a threat standpoint, from a crime standpoint, or a weapon has been introduced. Then second wave of that becomes the police. We should be the third or fourth responder, absent some kind of active shooter or something like that. We should not be on the front line of that. So I'm in favor of social workers taking those mental illness calls. I'm in favor of us pulling out of the schools and allow them to do that on their own. So other reforms, I want to look at them individually and to see what can we do or what should we be doing in that moment where we have opportunity for improvement from a training standpoint, equipment standpoint, our policy standpoint. I want to review all of those things. Again, I want to go through this exercise open-minded, open-hearted about what can we do to improve our relationship and how we deliver the services, because obviously many in our community are not satisfied with what they've been getting.
Yeah. So what? Maybe tap in. Well, my next question was on that. So maybe we can go a little deeper in depth on SCSD, on officers in the school, the resource officers. I had the question from two different teachers who both said, one of them said, she wasn't really a fan of the police altogether, but she likes having them in the school, and the officers that are in the school are good, and et cetera, et cetera. But neither of these teachers felt that they wanted officers gone from the school, but that is something that is a demand of the folks that are rallying, of the folks that are protesting. So what are your thoughts about officers in the schools, about the request to remove them, and where you are? I think you answered some of it, but if you want to elaborate on that any further.
I think that in some cases we do create a pipeline to the criminal justice system by having police in there unintentionally. There are rare cases where, we take a handful of guns out of the schools each year. There are a handful of cases where kids are charged with crimes because of the severity of what they've done. So again, I think we do unintentionally create a pipeline from the school system to the criminal justice system, which was not the intent of the program. It was meant to be a constructive interaction between police and the youth, but some of the schools are so out of control that police find themselves doing more safety-oriented things than they do the constructive things to what the school resource officer program, the actual platform that it was built on. I think that the school system, properly trained, properly resourced, can handle most of those things. I would be in favor of them being the front line of that and us pulling out of there. And one of my primary reasons is I had 13 officers at the school system. So I would like to have a better footprint downtown. I can use officers for that. I would like to have a better response to property crime investigations. We can use officers for that. So I would like to have my 13 officers back. And then here's the thing too. Once it looks like that the nation is getting ready to start heading this way as far as removing officers out of the schools in some examples, particularly in many of our urban communities where you're seeing this request. The only thing that I would ask you and your audience, once you take it, please don't bring it back to me. Please don't bring it back to me. Let them deal with that. We never asked to be in the schools. We never asked for that. Someone knocked on our door. We didn't knock on your door. You asked us to do that. And I agree that responsibility should be with the schools or some other entity.
Yeah. So this question was, Chief, how are you planning on responding to the challenge from the governor to come up with a plan to recreate the police departments? Will a group be pulled together to develop a plan of action, and who would be at that table? And yeah, I guess we'll just start with that one. How do you plan on dealing with, it was, I know we on the council are taking it under administrative, consideration. How do we reevaluate all our policy? How do we look at this differently? What are your thoughts about the governor's, statement?
Well, I think, we can add the governor probably to the top of that list of individuals that are making demands on law enforcement as a profession. I think that the same way that we're looking at the other ones, we have to put all of those on the board. Obviously, that would be a high priority because, too, the governor is also attached to the back of that agencies that fail to do significant reform will see an impact in the amount of dollars coming to their respective communities from the government, from the state. So I think that we need to look at those things individually. Try to come up with intelligent responses to those as to how we do them, or intelligent response as to why we don't believe that it should be something that we should be doing. I will tell you that in most cases, I believe that most chiefs agree that there are opportunities for improvement in our organization, but I just think that we have to intelligently implement these things to make sure that we're not having unintentional harms to our community as a result of it. But I do recognize that the government and some of the things the governor has on there are some of the same things that you're seeing on some of these other lists. But I think too, and I've been talking to my folks about this, many of the things that I have seen, the reason you don't see me running around like the sky is falling, there are a number of things that people are asking us for that already exist in our policies, already exist in our training, already exist in our procedures. So we need to do a better job of making that more explicit, more transparent to the community as to what we're already under or responsible for doing, because I think we have probably not done as good a job with that as we possibly could, or more, maybe people are not as informed as they quite should be, because right now a lot of things are being said with very high emotions.
Could you go into some of those? So what are some of the things that people are asking you guys for that you feel like you already do? You know?
Well, they asked for the duty to intervene. It's already in our policy. De-escalation training. We already train on de-escalation training. De-escalation in our policy. It's already in our policy. The chokehold. Many people think that you can just choke someone out. No, in our situation, you cannot use that kind of restrictive technique unless you're in a life and death situation where death or serious physical injury is imminent. That's the only time that you're authorized to use that. Some folks are for outlawing that altogether. I understand that. I would certainly be opposed to it, because I can assure you that you, a world travel man, that if you were somewhere and someone was on top of you and you felt like that you need to do something desperate to get this guy off of the top of you, and we said to you, well, you can get him off of you, but don't touch his head. Come on. You asking us to go after people that you call the police on. This guy with this gun, but then you say, well, don't do this maneuver when you're trying to get this person in custody. Well, that's easy to say from your couch. That's easy to say from your living room. And it's easy to say if you've never had to put handcuffs on someone. So I want to pump the brakes on some of these things, because I want to make sure that I'm not unintentionally putting the people who are putting their lives on the line at risk, while at the same time making sure that I hold them accountable for if they do something with these maneuvers or with a weapon or something that is excessive, that was not reasonable or necessary. There needs to be accountability for that as well. So I'm not asking for a blank check, but I certainly don't want to unintentionally put my people in harm's way.
All right. Well, this is something that I know we've had traction on lately. The question was, when will we have cameras on all officers? Is the Policemen's Benevolent Association still requesting extra pay for wearing the body cameras? And I guess I would just go into a broader one on that. What are your feelings about cameras in general, the policy about turning them off? You know, a lot of times we've had incidences where the officers have had the cameras, but they haven't been on when the incidences have occurred. So when will we have more cameras? Is PBA still asking for extra funds? And what's your general thoughts about the relationship between cameras and accountability?
So my thoughts on the cameras, I am a huge proponent of the cameras. I will tell you that we're in the process of getting our cameras deployed at full strength from an outfitting standpoint. You're probably going to see about 240, maybe 250 people in our organization with cameras because of the jobs that they do, primarily the uniform division. We will not have cameras on everyone in the organization, because there are some jobs, given the intricacies of what they do, that you would not want a camera on that individual. For example, if you are a homicide detective talking to a witness, I don't want that footage, nor would the witness want that footage on a body-worn camera, because who's going to talk to you with that? And then the other part, there are some things that you discuss if you're talking to a confidential informant or you're talking to a rape victim. There are a number of avenues to where people, because of the capacity that they work in, to where a camera would not be a wise thing to have on there. Now, with that being said, I think that any high traffic uniform calls for service supervisors who are over those individuals, traffic officers, all of those individuals should certainly have on a camera, and we should have an intelligent reason as to why we don't have, for people that we don't have a camera on. The other part of that, you asked about the PBA wanting additional money for that. That was silly. We're not going to pay them. We don't pay them to carry other pieces of equipment. We wouldn't pay them extra to wear this equipment. But hey, he's the PBA president. His job is to try to get them whatever he can get them. I get it, but I thought it was silly. The next thing is why don't they record for 8 hours? Well, let me put my citizen hat on, because you're actually my Common Council representative. So my Common Council representative, Mr. Driscoll, is, you know that the camera itself is practically free. That's just the equipment.
Right.
The company makes money on storage of the data. So are you going to pay for 250 officers wearing those cameras, 8 hours a day of storage? Common Council, are you willing to pay that bill?
I plead the fifth in the moment.
It's a huge financial question that I don't know if we can afford to record for 8 hours. Now, some agencies, I think it's rare though. There may be some agencies that do that, but most agencies have a policy that tells them when you get out of the car, when you engage a citizen, that it must be on in those kinds of moments. But I'm just telling you that from a pay standpoint, it will significantly go up for a city that's already having issues with budget issues. The cost of that significantly goes up if we're talking about recording 8 hours per officer for every shift. I don't know if the city can afford to do that. And then lastly, the relationship, I guess, between the cameras, police, and community. I'll say to you this. You've heard me privately and publicly say that my police family is like your family. The vast majority of them are good people. If they are who I say they are, the cameras should prove that. That's why I want cameras, because it provides an independent witness to what occurred. It doesn't give you everything, because the camera view is still limited in some aspects. But if we are who we say we are, which is, I believe, the vast majority do a good job, the cameras are our friend, and that's why I want the officers to have them.
All right. So what is your taking from there going to CRB, the Citizens Review Board? For those who are watching that aren't familiar with the CRB, Citizen Review Board is an agency that was formed by the Common Council, designed to take complaints and process them when someone has a problem with the treatment they receive from an officer. They go to the CRB and they file the complaint. What are your thoughts about the CRB, and what is its role in creating or assisting in accountability and transparency? Where do you see the CRB?
I believe that the chief of police should have some sort of entity that is looking over my shoulder. I have no problem with that, because the reason I don't have a problem with it is because I'm committed to doing the right thing. I'm committed to treating people with dignity and respect. And I think that this awesome amount of power that police have, there needs to be entities overlooking what police do within reason. You are aware that we are in the process of changing some of what we believe is either outdated or ineffective language in our current CRB language, to try to modify that so that it is applicable to the 21st century things that we're dealing with today. And also specifically now, some of these demands that we have, how do we change some of those CRB things to be more reflective of what the people expect today? What I'm not in favor of is the CRB being the discipline delivery system for the police department. I think that I would have no problem with them being someone appeals my decision that I've made from a discipline standpoint, and say that, hey, chief, you need to come in here and defend why you gave the Sergeant Joe Driscoll a 5-day suspension for such and such. And the CRB may say, well, we believe that should have been this or that. So I have no issue with that, provided that we have a CRB that's in place. The number one has been appropriately trained, that they have to take some sort of kind of oath, that they have the appropriate investigators to be able to do some fact finding for the things that they want to investigate as it relates to my investigation, and ensure that we're getting a product that everyone feels on both sides of the equation, both community and law enforcement, that is a fair process and due process for our entire community. So I would not have any issues with that, but I think it needs to be done in a way, again, that is fair to everyone.
All right, so this one's another one that I got from my Facebook. One, how do you work against officers profiling individuals? Two, what is the chief going to do about individuals who have died unjustly at the hands of police? So again, those aren't my questions. These are ones that were farmed from Facebook, but you said you were open to what came in. So how would you respond to those questions there, profiling and those who have died unjustly at the hands of police?
Well, we have a strict policy that prohibits profiling of individuals or any acts of bias or prejudice that is strictly prohibited within our organization. We have avenues with being internal affairs and CRB to where you can go and file a formal complaint if you feel that you've been the victim of that. And we talk about that in our training and in our both in the academy and in-service training that officers receive as it relates to those topics. This fall, we also have an outside company that is scheduled to come in to give us training on cultural bias, implicit bias, and those kinds of things. And the reason I chose an outside organization is because historically the Department of Syracuse had officers providing that training to the officers. Well, I believe that we should have non-police teaching that subject matter who are experts in that area, because sometimes if you have cops talking to cops, rarely will you have creativity, innovation, and a true independent view of the topic, because police tend to think alike, myself included. So for those kind of sensitive topics, which is why I brought that before you in the council, is that I think people who specialize in that should be teaching those subjects to the police department. And we are going to sign a contract for a 2-year program that will deliver that 2 consecutive years for our police department. As far as what can I do or what should be done about people unjustly killed by police, well, we have court systems in place for that. Obviously, criminal charges is one thing, one avenue for that to present those cases to the district attorneys, and then other would be civilly for the loss and the liability to which, if it is proven that it was unjustly done, that I believe that all family members, or the immediate families of those individuals should have those avenues. And then administratively, chiefs need to make sure that we're doing the right things. And if something was unjustly done in the form of using deadly force that resulted in someone's death, that person should certainly be removed from the department. It sounds a little bit about like they were talking about maybe going backwards into some of those things. I certainly would not have the means to be able to go backwards and do something like that.
Right. So what is your response to address the 9 demands issued by members of our community? And this would be the 9 demands from the different protest groups. Before you and I went on air, you were discussing briefly that you were reviewing that and discussing it. Any comments on how you plan to address the demands that have been put forth by all the protest and rally groups?
The Deputy Mayor Owens has been tasked with leading our efforts for that. And the mayor and myself and Deputy Mayor Owens are actually meeting tomorrow as we begin the process to incrementally diving into all of the demands that have been given. And we certainly plan to address those and provide a response for those. Again, some of them we will look at and we will certainly implement those things. Some of the things that we already do, we will illuminate and show you where that already exists. There will be some to where maybe we partially do it, to where we see an opportunity for changes to improve upon that. But I think in all things that we do, we have to be transparent with the public as to what we're doing and how we're doing so. But I think one of the main things is that the public wants to see is a sense of urgency in responding to these things. This is not something that we want to kick this can down the street. People are wanting some immediate change within our respective cities.
So the next question was, is the chief planning on removing officers who live out of the area and hiring from within Syracuse? Only 8% of the police force live in the city, and that contributes to a lot of the misunderstandings. Another comment was very similar. Our police need to be a part of our community. I'd like to know if SPD is actively recruiting and hiring minorities, especially those from within the city, and if not, are there any plans to do so? So those are kind of a two-parter there. I guess, you and I have had a lot of conversations about residency, but the first question being, would you not hire those who live outside of the city or remove officers who don't? How do you address that only 8% of the force lives in the city? And do you plan on recruiting and hiring minorities, especially those who live within the city? What's the plan of action for that? If not, what do you plan to do to address it?
So I have no plans to remove people who do not move in the city. Our officers have certainly due process rights and things in place that we can't arbitrarily say that, hey, you're fired because you live in Cicero.
Yeah, perhaps if I can just interrupt you 1 second, perhaps we should clarify that the Taylor law and what goes on statewide. We can't require legally in New York State to demand officers live in the area that they do. So that's an important clarification for people who commented. I knew the answer to that, but please continue on with what you're saying. I'm going to interrupt. Just want to make sure we made that clear.
Yes, and actually it has to be done through negotiation, which was done with this most recent contract. That was one of the I would say the biggest hooks for the city, in that they were able to finally get the PBA to agree to do so. So it is a part of this current contract that is still kind of hanging out there, that is getting ready to go before arbitration to have that. I see significant value in individuals who are police working in the city and living in the city. I think that there is value to knowing your neighbor in a very intimate and personal way, that your kids are in the school system for some of the same school systems that we are working with, the same churches, and all of the things that make a neighbor a neighbor. I see the value in that. I think you're more likely to have constructive relationships if you live in the community, because you will do those personal things in the community that develop relationships. So I get that, and I see that side of the coin. The other side of the coin is I don't think that I should have the right to tell Joe Driscoll where to raise his wife or to raise his family and kids. I don't believe I should have that right because there are people who choose to live in the city for personal, professional reasons, and they decided that's where they wanted to live. There are people who choose to live in other communities. That's what they decided that they wanted to do. So I don't think that I should have a right to be able to tell individuals that, even though I see the value in it. The other part, from a recruitment standpoint. So here's a question to answer that question. So you say, the individual asked this question, well, are we recruiting minorities, and are we going out and trying to get black and brown people into this police department? Check your rearview mirror for the past 10 days. And you ask me, what's the likely response from a 19-year-old black and brown young man or young lady if we walked into their house today and say, would you like to be the police? Come on. People act like we got black and brown people lined up around the corner that want to be the police. Knock it off. That's not true. When I told my friends I wanted to be the police growing up, you know what they said? Are you crazy? Why the hell would you want to do that? Not in a mean-spirited way. It was just one of those things that they're like, why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
It's not a very popular profession to black and brown people for obvious reasons. So we try our best, and we're in the process of overhauling our recruitment program to be more minority focused, to be more 21st century reflective, to where we go to online platforms, because the kids have these devices in their hands, and that's how you reach them, to make sure that if we're looking for Latinos, that we send Latino officers to that community fair or festival to recruit them. Because I can tell you, one of the things that I've told this story many times, I was attending Eastern Kentucky University. It's a predominantly white institution. It's about 18,000 students, and there were about 1,000 African Americans that attended the school while I was there. So we were a very small group on the campus, and we were like a family because we all knew each other. At our career fair, a lady from Louisville, her name was Hazel Walker. She was the recruiter for the city of Louisville. And being a black male with a degree in law enforcement, I could pretty much go where I wanted to go because that was very rare in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. She said something to me that she knew would resonate. She said to me at that recruiter's table, "We have an African-American assistant chief." Why did that black woman say that to me? I'll tell you why she said it. Because she knew that if I had any level of intelligence, I would see that as I've got an opportunity to rise in that organization. So when people see it, they think that it's possible for me too to be able to do this. So I've got to get the right people recruiting. I've got to get the right message to these people, some of which who may be second guessing that right now. But two things is going to happen to the kids who are here today who are living through this moment. They're either going to be completely turned off by the profession and say, I would never consider that as a career, or they're going to be inspired to be a part of the change, to be the face of the profession going forward, to be that kid in the community that can come back and be that positive contact or example for kids to see that every cop is not Officer Chauvin that we saw in Minneapolis. I've got to find those few kids who are inspired by that. I've got to find them. Here's the problem. When I find them, I can assure you there'll be 10 other police departments, same way you see with everybody going to Zion Williamson's house. When you're Zion Williamson, every coach in the country wants you.
Yep.
So if you're a minority, Black, Hispanic kid, particularly females, and you have an interest in this career field, you can really go anywhere in the country that you want to go, which is why I want to make sure that we have the right competitive salaries, benefits, opportunities in the organization, and promotional advancements, because you really don't have diversity until decision makers in your organization are diverse. The best example I can give you for that is when I arrived in Little Rock, we did a turkey giveaway at Thanksgiving. And we said for the first 50 people that show up, you will receive a turkey and a ham. So I said, we're going to do this on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving. I told a female friend about this thing that I was very proud of, that, hey, we're going to have a turkey giveaway. This is my first holiday here. This is a good thing for us to do. We had about 300 turkeys and maybe 50, 60 or so hams. So the first 50 people that show up, you get a turkey and a ham. When I told her about that, she said to me, why are you going to give it to them on Wednesday? So I'm a typical male. What difference does it make? It's a damn free ham and turkey. She said, well, it takes 24 hours to thaw out. And if you give it to them on Wednesday, they won't have enough time to cook it for Thanksgiving. Why don't you give it to them on Tuesday? That's the value of having a woman at the table. That's the value of having a Latino at the table. There are things to which people look through a lens and see that, Joe, you won't see, or that I won't see. But that's true diversity. And I learned from that moment that that's why you want an inclusive process where people genuinely have a say-so of what's going on. And then lastly, I will tell you that recruitment can't be on my shoulders alone. You can't expect your chief of police to diversify your police department. The churches have got to get involved. The colleges have got to get involved. The military institutions have to get involved. And the community must present law enforcement as a noble profession, which it is, despite the disappointments that we have recently. We know that the vast majority of these cops do a really good job, but people are not going to want to come in the profession if they don't feel that it's noble, as I believe it is, but it's a community responsibility to make the agency diverse.
Yeah, and I would say I was on one of the last podcasts I had. I feel like I'm on record talking trash about politicians. I did that a lot in my career when I was a musician. And I didn't get involved because I thought there was no problems. I also grew up in a home where politics was viewed as a noble career. So, but I also saw that, in the 90s or whatever, late 80s, 90s, I felt like things had gone the wrong way. So I would just say to young folks, as well, to your point about what you're talking about, that if you are frustrated, there's no better way than joining, to change the dynamic. If you feel like, you're not represented enough, if, brown and black folk aren't represented enough or whatever it is, there's no better way to change that than to picking up a shovel and getting involved and changing the dynamics. If, because as we were talking about those young folks that are down at the rallies, are they going to join the force? And I would say that's, one revolutionary action you could take. I got a lot of friends that I grew up with that are now training other officers, so just a point that kind of sparked when you said that. So we seem to be, this is another question, we seem to be on a Ferris wheel of different policing models. Some police chiefs favor a traditional model, others turn to a more community-based model. What does data and anecdotal evidence tell us? My experience, this individual was a principal at a high school. My experience working in the schools is that when a community-based model is used, the communication between the officers, the community police, and the community in general just increases exponentially. Trust and familiarity increase, and the incredible violence we have that we're experiencing right now decreases. And another thing I'd comment, add on that, was my friend Oceana said, for all the years she's been living in Syracuse, she never knew which officer worked her neighborhood or really knew any of their names. And kind of, we hear that again and again. I go to community meetings, back before when the world was still going, that, we'd go and that's the number one thing you hear from community people. I want to know which officer is mine, which one I can call, who I can talk to, and getting to kind of know each other in that office. So what are your thoughts about traditional models, community models, and how do we get, they keep saying, the thing that I keep hearing is they want officers out of the car. They want them walking the neighborhoods. They want them talking to people. So what are your thoughts about those different models and those kind of concepts?
Well, I'll unpack that as you have presented it. People want more genuine contact, dialogue with the police who are working in their community. We often hear, and you've heard it at several of the meetings that you attend, what happened to the bike officer? What happened to the walking beat? What happened to the officer that was responsible for my area, that we would call him and ask that specific officer when we had an issue? We've tried to do some of that, I guess, in the traditional form when we went to our decentralizing of the police department. When we divided the city up into 3 divisions, being the north, southwest, and southeast. So we have the same officers riding the same areas every day. And then you also have a district commander that is specifically responsible for your area, not for a time slot, but for 24 hours a day. They're responsible for this geographical area. If you come to some of our neighborhood meetings, either by Neighborhood Watch or TNT, you will learn that the people responsible for your area are the same folks that come to the meetings each time when we have those. They're the same people that you would reach out to so that you can get to know them on a first name basis. And we've been fortunate, even though it's rare to have it, but we've had some meetings where the officers who actually ride that territory showed up for the meeting. That was the purpose of that decentralization that we went through. I prefer a community policing model from a strategy standpoint and also data driven. So I'll go first with the community policing model. If you can't show tangible examples of partnerships, prevention, and problem solving, you're not doing community policing. You simply have a banner on your wall. You have to be able to show, again, partnerships, prevention, and problem solving. Those are the 3 primary pillars of community policing. And when you engage in those things with your community, you're exercising community policing. The other part of that is, how can you be efficient with the workforce that you have for this broad spectrum of things that we're asked to do when you look at the 100,000+ calls or so that we're asked to respond to? Well, we have to be data driven and evidence based. So with that, we have to have a mechanism in place that gathers, analyzes, disseminates information to the appropriate personnel, police and sometimes civilian, and then make sure that we are strategically delivering our energy to the individuals responsible for crime in our community, and also deliver strategically delivering services where we have opportunities to improve or increase our community policing footprint in the community. So those two things are kind of what we subscribe to in our agency, and I think those are kind of 21st century principles.
So the next question was, has there been any measurable changes in the outcomes since SPD adopted its new use of force policy last year? Have you seen a measurable, tangible change in anything that's occurred due to the use of force policy?
Well, until we have enough data to be able to compare that to the year previous, I don't think we can intelligently answer that question. I know that our training has changed in some regards. Some of the things that we make sure that officers understand. Obviously, in watching this Minneapolis situation, that duty to intervene has been pushed to the forefront, even more important today, because we saw not only was that a violation of policy, but a district attorney thought that they committed a crime by not intervening. So that has certainly pushed that to the forefront. I'm very proud of the fact that many of the things that people are asking for today already exist in our new policy, some of which existed in the old policy. But we're very proud of that policy. We will take a look at it again to make sure that there's still not some other opportunities for improvement that we can change in there, because we want that document to be a living document. So we're never going to hang it on the wall and act as if we're done adjusting it or modifying it based upon the challenges that we see each and every day.
All right, and one of the questions that kind of came up in a couple of different formats, and maybe we can, go into maybe some folks don't read the paper as much as others, but when you first got here at one of the community meetings, you said, most, I forget what number you used, 95% of cops are doing the right thing, and we've got a few bad apples that we got to deal with, and that remark alone ended up in the officers refusing to march in the St. Patty's Day parade in a big kind of dust up with the PBA. So I guess I'd ask, another quote that comes to mind, Malcolm X said, you can't legislate goodwill, and you can't policy, and a lot of the policy stuff that we talk about, so much of what happens is based on morale and goodwill and stuff that's going on rather. So how are you navigating trying to be a force for accountability and transparency, and still being the person there that supports your officers fully and they know you got their back? I know it's a tightrope you're walking, so maybe you could just talk about that, because it's funny, you have a similar job to me where I think I have 10 emails right now, people demanding right away that I disband the police department completely, and about 15 emails of people demanding that I increase funding and get 20 more officers out on the street. So I know you walk a similar line with everything that's going on. So maybe you could talk about how are you trying to create accountability, knowing that you've gotten such blowback, and trying to show your officers you support them. How do you walk that tightrope, and what do you feel?
Well, it's $1 million question for a chief of police today. But I have a very common analogy that I use that most people will get, and you already alluded to it. If you put a big fella like myself up on a tightrope and you ask me, Chief, how are you going to walk from this end to that end and survive in this turbulent time of walking that rope? Well, that rope for me has to represent doing the right thing, because that's the line I'm going to focus on. Because if I keep my feet planted on that line, when I'm pulled in the direction of the mayor and the common council, when I'm pulled in the direction of the police and the PBA, when I'm pulled in the direction of the community, stakeholders, nonprofits, critics, adversaries, I have to survive. And the only way that I survive in that climate to where everyone is pulling me in different directions is when no one is watching. I have to be able to stand on, when I made that decision in my mind and heart, when they were aligned, I felt like I did the right thing. If that results in me upsetting any of those four entities that may get upset at my decision, and every decision that I make, I'm going to have someone that does not agree with that decision. And my decisions are very, very broad brushing. But the way that I survive in this business is to do the right thing. My officers, I've made it abundantly clear to them. Our community, I've made it abundantly clear to them. When the officers are right, I'm going to support them. When they're wrong, I'm going to hold them accountable. You can see there are examples in the community to where the officers have done something. I have supported them. You're getting ready to see also when you start with this 50A thing, when you look at discipline as to what it looked like in the organization prior to Kenton Buckner, what it looks like today, you can see when they misstep, I've held them accountable. I've done exactly what I said I was going to do. That's how I survive. And if I can focus on those things, the objective majority, which I think is about 80% of our society, because 10%, in my opinion, no matter what I do, they're going to be anti-police. There's 10%, no matter what we do, right, wrong, or right, they're going to support the police. The 80% look at the facts. They look at common sense. They look at reasonableness, and they say, Chief, you did the right thing in that example, and they're going to support you. If they feel like that I've been wrong, they're going to want me to at least be able to explain what I've done, why I did it, take accountability for it, and then move forward from that moment. So I try to make sure that I'm responding to that 80%, that I keep my feet focused on that line, and that's how I've survived in this business. My life is very stressful. It's a very, very tough job, probably one of the toughest jobs in America. But if you were as I've said this to people, if you had 9 lives and I've used up 8 of mine, on my 9th life, I would come back as a police officer. So this profession has been very, very good to me. So I don't regret my chosen profession, but I can tell you by the day, it's becoming more and more difficult to survive in this business.
Yeah, your field and my field both, Chief.
Yes.
So we're coming up on an hour. I just want to let folks know this is Salt City Grind Podcast. This is, I've just been having conversations with people in the community. These will all be available on YouTube afterwards, and they'll be available on Facebook as well. So before we wrap up, Chief, is there anything that you want to cover that we didn't get to?
Well, I would just say in closing, first of all, thank you for having me on here. The mayor and deputy mayor and myself are working on giving a robust response to these demands that we've gotten from several agencies, trying to chronologically put them in order, prioritize them, start coming up with a plan as to how we're going to respond to our community in a constructive and positive way. I will say to our community, particularly those who have been recently protesting and you're frustrated with our profession and even our agency, first of all, thank you for the vast majority of you peacefully and lawfully protesting. I greatly appreciate that when I look at what has happened in some other communities compared to Syracuse. And then lastly, I would just say to the police officers, there's a lot of stuff going on right now. You're hearing a lot of things. Some of it probably makes you uneasy. The vast majority of you, you come to work and you do a great job. We have some opportunities for improvement before us. If we continue to stick to the things that have gotten us this far, which is doing the right thing, working with the community hand in hand to protect this city, we will come out on the other side of this and find ourselves on the right side of history.
All right, Chief. One last thing that just came to me while you were talking.
Yes, sir.
At your time in Little Rock, you I believe from when you started to when you ended, the force was a lot more diverse from when you arrived and what was the data on that? Because that was something I meant to talk to you about.
About 40%. About 40% of the people that we hired were Black and brown people in Little Rock. Now you have to realize Little Rock is a majority minority city, so it was about 42% African American, 7% Hispanic, and then I think maybe 2% other. So it was still to get minorities at that percentage to come into the profession was significant, but it was a majority minority community.
What was the success there? Did you have partners? Like you said, I realized that, same as on council, we spin a lot of different plates, and a lot of times it's the partners that you're working with that lead to result in success. What was the key to getting those diversity numbers up in Little Rock, and are there any lessons from there that you're trying to apply here in Syracuse?
When we had surrogates to carry our message into the respective communities that we were seeking, and when we had Latino organizations begin to assist us in recruiting, job fairs, having us at their festivals, Latino stakeholders saying that this is a good thing to go in this community. When it became our message versus my message, that's when we saw the significant increase in our minority recruiting, when it became a true joint operation.
Great. That was one that I wanted to ask myself that I've forgotten about. So, Chief, as I said at the beginning, even on certain matters we may not agree, I definitely deeply appreciate you always being willing to dialogue and chop it up and try to talk it out and release some of that steam, as we talked about earlier. And I definitely, I've appreciated the work you've done here. So thanks for coming on. Thanks for talking to the community and fielding it, and wish you the best of luck as you go back out there.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
All right, Chief. Take care. You have a good one.
Thank you.